Hello, and welcome to the third lecture, this one on the consultant's most important skill. The most important skill for a consultant is actually listening. Now, somewhat curiously, listening is the skill that most of us developed initially when we were born and interacting with the environment around us. It was before we could certainly read, before we could write, so we had to be very attuned to the environment through listening. Over the years, in our schooling, we learned how to read and write, spent a whole lot more time on those skills, and most educators assumed we already had the skill of listening and didn't need a whole lot of further work in that area. The reality is, though, listening is a skill that needs to be constantly worked on, and one needs to be vigilant to keep that skill at the highest of levels. As you saw in the coursework, there was that listening story that simply asked you to respond, are facts in the story or not? Out of the 20 or so questions, very few people get more than 18 right, even though they know it's a listening exercise. Somewhat curiously, one of the first sifts that a client is going to make in working with a consultant is, do they understand me? Are they listening to me? More than just do they hear me, do they actually listen and understand what it is that I'm trying to pursue, what the obstacles are, what hurdles I'm having to overcome, etc. It may be instructive to look at some of the reasons why people don't listen as well as they need to. As a consultant, it may be counterintuitive, but your experience actually gets in the way. What happens is the consultant goes from client to client, situation to situation, and picks up a body of knowledge. Then when they enter the new organization, they think, oh, I've seen this before, and they begin to take shortcuts. They assume that things are as they were at previous companies, at prior assignments, and they begin to implement a solution that may in fact not be realistic. Furthermore, a client will not be willing to go down the path of the solution with that consultant if they don't believe the consultant really understands. Even if the consultant has the right answer, until the client perceives that the consultant understands them, they're not going to be very happy to follow the path that the consultant is suggesting. So therefore, it's important that we demonstrate our listening skills. Another reason that consultants will sometimes not listen well, they're afraid of objections. As long as they continue to talk, as long as they are the ones controlling the conversation in broadcast mode, then it leaves very little opportunity for someone else to ask a question, to raise an objection, to challenge a point. So the consultant sometimes will just continue to talk, continue to demonstrate their expertise, their mastery of the subject, in the hope of being able to talk over the client, in essence. There are some other reasons why people don't listen. They view the other person as a hurdle or an obstacle to be overcome. So therefore, they don't really want to give that person an opening to destroy credibility, to put a challenge to a solution being recommended. So they'll just not listen for fear of having to address or respond to that challenge. Sometimes we as people anticipate the response we're going to receive. So we're already forming our answer to a question that won't be asked. But because we think we know what the client is going to be asking us, we start to answer that question. But it never arrives. All we're doing is answering what we think would have been the question. And obviously, if you are just trying to reduce conflict, you might just try to continue to talk in the hopes that someone will give up their desire to raise an objection, to give a different point of view. Those are some of the reasons why consultants and experts in general will sometimes fail to listen as well as they could or should. Other things to think about. Now that you know what important skills to look for in a consultant, or at least the most important skill, where do you find consultants? Some of the places you can find a consultant would be at different trade associations. If you belong to an industry association of one kind or another. Very often at those meetings, there will be consultants who service that particular industry. Or you can ask others in your industry or in your job function or with common experiences who they previously have used, who they recommend. Word of mouth is a very important way to do recommendations and to source consultants as well. Another way to do it is to look at who's publishing, who's speaking, who's writing blogs. Sometimes innovative thought can come that way. Sometimes industry expertise can be established that way. But I do want to caution you. The price of entry for many of those things is very low. It costs essentially nothing to have a blog. And speaking engagements can sometimes be purchased, whether or not someone is truly worthy of that speaking engagement by virtue of their experience, their point of view, etc. One of the least favored ways to find a consultant is to look in a telephone directory or simply to look at a website. Now that doesn't mean that should not be done, but without having the context of how this person actually works with clients and having a sense for their methodology, their approach, their results, it's a little blind to go simply on a telephone directory listing or just a simple website.